Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you. Welcome to the Baltimore Museum of Art. Thank you for coming on this rainy evening, and I understand that there was yet another graduation nearby, so thank you for being bold with our traffic, and brave with our traffic, I should say. So thank you all for being here tonight for what promises to be a very special conversation. We have a full house here, and I know you're all here to hear from the acclaimed contemporary artist, Maryland native Louis Fratino. Fratino and Matisse, To See This Light Again, the exhibition which is on view currently downstairs, has received acclaim. And I think for those of you who have yet to see it, you will be in for quite a treat. We're especially delighted to be hosting Louis tonight because this is a moment when art can speak across different kinds of ways of communication that may seem repetitive, saturated, and perhaps one-sided. But there is something powerful, not only in Louis's work, but about the continued vitality of art and specifically beautiful painting itself. There's an enduring pull of artists who help us to see through the simple tool of the paintbrush and the simple materiality of paint, intimacy, beauty, and the human connection in new ways. So as many of you know, Louis graduated from the Maryland Institute College of Art in 2015. Yay, Micah! Micah is celebrating its 200th anniversary, and what a glorious institution that is for this city. Louis's rise in the contemporary art world has been nothing short of extraordinary. He had an early Fulbright Fellowship in Berlin. That quickly led to international recognition on the international art stage, major solo exhibitions across Europe, and of course, his inclusion in the 60th Venice Biennale in 2024, confirming his place as one of the most exciting artists of our generation. Louis draws deeply from lived experience. He paints domestic interiors, he paints intimate portraits, he paints still lifes, he paints moments of tenderness and desire. His work is emphatic in centering queer love. His work is emphatic in centering vulnerability, friendship, and the beauty of everyday life. These paintings feel timeless, but they're absolutely beautiful in their palette, in their brushstroke, and in their composition. They're classic and contemporary at the same time. They invite us to simply not look at paintings, but to consider what it means to truly see another person. For Louis, that way of seeing was shaped right here at the Baltimore Museum of Art. During his years at MICA, he spent countless hours studying our extraordinary Matisse collection. He has spoken beautifully, and for those of you who have yet to hear Louis speak, you are in for a treat. This is one of the most profoundly moving artists with the spoken word that I have yet to meet. He has spoken beautifully about the influence Matisse had on him, particularly his mastery of line, color, atmosphere, and the poetry of domestic space. Now, as many of you know, Henri Matisse famously had a great artistic rivalry with a Spaniard, Pablo Picasso. Their relationship pushed each of them to paint more boldly, more freely, more radically. They were frenemies in the truest sense of the word. They sharpened one another, they challenged one another, and art history has long treated them as towering figures in conversation across decades. But standing in this beautiful exhibition, I found myself thinking, more than a century later, Matisse may have finally met his match. And I say that with admiration for both artists. What's so remarkable about this exhibition is not imitation or homage. Louis Fratino is not painting after Matisse. He's painting with him across time. There's confidence, sensuality, and an emotional choreography, I will say, of dance between Louis's work and Matisse's. It allows, all of these qualities, I should say, allows Louis's work to stand beside one of the greatest painters of all time and absolutely hold its own. I think if Matisse himself, and wouldn't it be lovely, if Matisse himself could walk through these galleries tonight, I think he would be saying that these paintings are stunning. Louis selected each of the Matisse works included in this exhibition himself. Many of them are from Matisse's celebrated Nice period, when he became captivated by luminous interiors, patterned rooms, and languorous figures bathed in light. Placing these works in dialogue with Louis's creates something genuinely electric, a conversation across generations about pleasure, observation, and the sheer beauty of painting. We are deeply grateful to Louis Fratino for his partnership, his generosity, and trust in helping us shape this exhibition. He has quickly become one of our most beloved artists that we have worked with, whom we have worked with. Speaking of beloved, I also want to thank our co-curators, Dr. Virginia Anderson and Katy Rothkopf, whose scholarship, care, and collaboration made this nuanced and deeply resonant presentation possible. Let's give them a hand, please. And of course, we extend our heartfelt thanks to our generous sponsors, the departed Nancy Dorman, her husband, Stanley Mazeroff, George Patrokoulos and Diamanta Silas, and Steve Pulamud. Lastly, I want to remind you that this exhibition is part of a trio of Matisse-focused presentations at the Baltimore Museum of Art. There's 3 exhibitions on the Modernist Master here right now, each offering a fresh perspective on an artist whose influence continues to resonate, whose influence continues to matter and evolve in surprising and inspiring ways. Thank you again for joining us tonight. I hope you leave feeling what I did walking through this exhibition, that great art history is not fixed in the past. It's alive and right here, and it grew up in Maryland. It keeps unfolding through artists like Louis Fratino, and now I'm delighted to pass the microphone to this evening's speakers. Please give a round of applause.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. We're thrilled. I just want to say just one thing that we haven't scripted, that this has been such a delight working with the brilliant Virginia Anderson and the equally brilliant Louis Fratino. I've had the most fun I've had in a long time. And this conversation is really sort of the culmination of a wonderful partnership between the 3 of us, which I'm going to miss after September 6th. But thank you all for being here. Okay, Virginia. Oh.
Right back at you.
Okay, thank you. We have some prepared questions and some slides, but I'm imagining that things will go off the rails. So, and Louis will just talk about what he wants. But we are again thrilled to have you all here, and particularly thrilled to have so many members of Louis's family here as well. You know, we just want to give a little background about how this show happened. As many of you know, the BMA has the largest and most wonderful collection of works by Henri Matisse of any museum in the world, with over 1,600 examples. And as part of our mission to always think about Matisse in many aspects, particularly in the Center for Matisse Studies, we are often looking for new stories to tell. And in a couple of years ago, one of our curators of contemporary art, I think was Leslie Cozy, our now is the department head of prints drawings and photographs, was presenting this beautiful print by someone I did not know, and was hearing all about this young artist from Maryland who loved European modernism. And during the meeting, the accessions meeting for the curators, Virginia Anderson texted me and said, "Hey, you should really do a show about Louis Fratino and Matisse." And I said, well, okay, first tell me who he is. No, just kidding. And I said, I'd love to, but only if you would do it with me. And that started this beautiful relationship between all three of us. Luckily, Louis said yes.
Yeah.
So, I know, this is such a great pair, right? As the concept for the show evolved, one of the many points we wanted to make was that this relationship, this source of inspiration for Louis as an artist in thinking about modernism was ongoing and something that had started at we can only say, relatively young age. And so in pairing these two self-portraits, we thought that this sort of helped tell the story. But Louis, I would love to hear from you a little bit more about that ongoing relationship that you have with Matisse and his work, and tell us a little bit, if you can, about how you first encountered Matisse's work, or what it was about it that resonated with you.
Yeah, so I studied here in Baltimore, and it's been a surreal and amazing way to come back to the city to be in this museum showing with Matisse. And I think studying here and being able to be in person with the collection absolutely influenced, my affinity and respect for the Matisse paintings. And yeah, I don't know, I think it's kind of mysterious, the things that move you, and I think my work has been this ongoing exploration of like how I'm part of this tradition of painting and story. And but I think, yeah, being here in Baltimore and being able to be live in person with these works definitely shifted something for me in a way that probably wouldn't have happened if I didn't have access to this world-class collection.
Lovely. Let's go to the next slide, please, Katy. Thank you. So as Asma referenced in her introduction, the process for this show is very much a kind of dialogue, really, I think, between Louis and the collection. And it was really so much fun, because how often do we get to bring a contemporary artist who's so passionate about our collection and about this material into the galleries, into the vaults, into the study center, and look at things together and really talk about them and sort of talk them through. And it was such a joy, really, for us to see you responding so beautifully to these works. But can you talk a little bit about how has the BMA collection a little bit more sort of shaped your evolution as an artist, or seeing these works and kind of living with them over the course of time?
Yeah, I think seeing the subjects that I'm interested reflected in an artist so loved as Matisse, like the interior, the body. Something as simple as flowers, like these things that maybe seem not serious enough to be art. Like it can feel so heavy to like start a painting. Like, what is this really about? And I think there's a kind of joy in Matisse's work of living, of looking at life, and I take a lot of license from that. And I think being able to be surrounded by that here at school, in an almost naive way, made me feel like, why not me? I can dive into this kind of thing too. Never imagining that they would be hung side by side, of course. But seeing the rigor brought to this kind of joy, that there's a rigorousness to also joy as a subject. And I think that deeply affected me, being able to be around that kind of work. And then being invited here and being able to go through storage and the racks and drawings, and I think using art history as a reference, you want to be close to it, and I think making these paintings are a way of also making a relationship with these people, and that this has just been like the dream of any artist, I think, to be able to see like that's a copper plate etching that he's canceled after they finished the edition, and feeling the touch and his presence was so moving, and really the opportunity of a lifetime for sure.
As we worked on the show, I want to thank Laura Albans, our curatorial research associate in the Center for Matisse Studies, who made an enormous list for Louis of things to choose. Paying attention, our conservators will like this, to light levels. What had been shown recently, we sort of gave him a cold list of the sorts of things that we thought might appeal to him.
Which was only
900?
1,100. I think it was like a 59-page PDF.
It was a 59-page PDF.
We made you do your homework.
Yeah.
I was not a complete pushover, although it might look like that when you're in the galleries. But it was really fun. Louis very much picked his works for the show early on and said, here are the things that I'd like to show, and let's negotiate over the Matisses a bit.
And by negotiate,
and the negotiating was relatively quick, but anyway, but it was so funny. These crayon drawings came in, and we hadn't really talked about why he had chosen these in particular. And I'm sure our interpretation staff would have loved to have known ahead of time that they were his versions of these Matisse prints. Tell us a little bit about how these were made.
Yeah, so in 2017, I was actually in another show with Matisse, but it was a little bit more DIY. And a friend of mine had collected these transfer lithographs that he found at auction, and had the crazy idea to make a show of the drawings in his studio. And so that was in Dusseldorf in Germany, and I was, in 2017, I guess 24 years old. And I think, when you're a young artist, you kind of don't know what you're doing, and you're excited by art history, things that move you. And what I feel when I look at these is that kind of innocence of like inserting myself into a conversation that I'm so glad that I had the courage to do it then, and maybe it feels more complicated now, but these are just, clearly me looking at these Matisse, these beautiful drawings of the body, of the gesture, of pattern, and feeling like I wanted to see myself or my desire reflected in them. And a funny anecdote about these works, is that these were made at my mom and dad's kitchen table with crayons, and just, that show was in the winter. I was home for Christmas, and it was just a thing to do. But I think being able to show how elemental and early this reference was for me was important. I don't know that I think about these as like the most important works I've ever made, but for this show, it's the beginning of a really beautiful story that hopefully is going to last till the end of my practice. So
I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Oh, God, sorry. favorite paintings. Here, we were really struck. First of all, I just want to thank the lenders to our show, who were all incredibly generous and said yes when we asked them to lend things. We've been so grateful to be able to bring these works together in dialogue in the galleries. This work that you're seeing on the left, yes, there we go, good. Waking Up First is just spectacular. And of course, if you get a chance to see the show in the gallery, if you haven't already, it really sings across the space. This light is for real, nothing to be messed with. Absolutely beautiful. So light obviously features highly in the title of our exhibition and in the concept of this link between you and Matisse in conveying, a sense of intimacy and a sense of beauty. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think about light in your work, and what role does it serve, and how do you, choose to focus on it?
Yes, when I first started showing, I was painting myself and the people around me, and there was a lot of focus on, the male nude and queer identity, which continues to be a super central and really important aspect of my work. But after my first show at Sycamore Malloy Jenkins, I felt like I wanted to deepen the context for the work and for the context of the erotic and make, how can I get closer to what's true about being a person? Like we're so multifaceted as people, and I feel very much like a painter who wants to talk not just to queer history or queer contemporary life, but to all of history. I'm curious about so many things, and so I think I kind of arrived through my love of Matisse at this universal subject, which is light, and it's a subject that moves so many painters and so many artists. And the construction of this painting was really kind of working through that at a pretty fundamental level. Like, how can I literally sideline the human figure and that narrative, put it at the bottom of the painting, and make the center of the painting be about something as simple as light falling on a wall? And I wanted to talk about this interior with Egyptian curtain because I really learned about how to make painting have an interior light or its own light, like how to make a painting that gives off light through a kind of chromatic play. And so Matisse uses black as a color, and he talks about this so beautifully about how, black is the thing that kind of creates light. And so much of my relationship with art history is just trying to figure out how that works. And so I think these are a great example of me thinking about exterior light, interior light, how black is the thing that activates color. So I'm thinking about Matisse also as kind of a craftsperson too, not just this iconic figure from art history or the representation of the female nude, but really the nuts and bolts of painting, and how can I make better painting by getting into these specific qualities of his work.
I love that because it really kind of shows the relationship between the formal aspect of your work and the conceptual aspect of your work and how closely intertwined those things are.
That those are never separate, actually. The further I get into the material aspect of painting, the closer I get to, or sometimes gets revealed to me, the concept, and that's something I love about Matisse, that the gesture and what's represented are always married and they're never separated, and he does that so well every time.
This is one of I think one of our favorite pairings in the show, and I know you have some thoughts about being able to do this. I just want to talk a little bit about the painting on the left, which many of you may know, by Matisse, Blue Eyes, which I think is one of the most beautiful works by Matisse in our collection. It features Matisse's, a woman that came into Matisse's house, actually as a nurse for his wife. Her name was Lydia. She was from Russia, a very, very a beautiful and committed person who ended up first serving as became his model, his muse, and then his companion at the end of his life, and really helped him very much at the end of his life when he was not in good health. She was the person who kept things running. And this is his first portrait of her. It is small-ish compared to his other works in the collection, but it is so, it feels so contemporary. She feels like she could be wearing her tank top and in the same room with us, I think. And the idea that it was made almost 100 years ago is remarkable to me. And when we were working on the show, I think, Lou, you shared with us another, I think it was maybe even another image that may have referenced her. We ended up with this beautiful one, thank God. But what was it about this painting that resonated with you in your time here in our galleries?
I mean, I think like you, I find it incredibly beautiful. It's also one of my favorites in the museum, and one of the ones that intimidated me a lot, thinking about having the paintings hang side by side. I was so worried that all the things I'm insecure about my work might be really obvious or frank, because these paintings are made so spectacularly and reveal so much. But yeah, I reached a point where I was like, this is not an invitation that comes every day. And, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it really gets to the heart of my project, as a painter, that what was happening 100 years ago still matters, and there's still so much to learn from. And yeah, I think that I love painting that transports me into a kind of feeling. And I think the close cropping of this painting, the way her gaze is so enigmatic and direct, the way that the skin and the textiles are rendered with such care that you almost feel them. You know, these are things that I want to do in my work and learn from. So having them side by side is crazy, yeah.
They look great together, by the way. And here's an even more audacious pairing.
Indeed, yeah, we love this. I mean, I love this pairing. You've taken, well, the large reclining nude, of course, or the pink nude, is like such an icon of modernist art. I mean, it's everything. It's abstract, it's, fantastic, and sculptural. And your Tom, that we've paired it with, is just a delightful painting. I mean, you're riffing on this composition, on this flow of the body, and this close cropping, this, and I love the way these two inform each other, that the intimacy of your work adds intimacy to this icon of modernism. The icon of modernism, formalizes your work a little bit. One of my favorite aspects is, as I keep calling it, the cereal bowl. I learned today maybe it's more an ice cream bowl that Tom, has in front of him. And it also, I think, to the thesis of the show and sort of this dynamic between the two, that there's the element, as you say, of talking about, queer relationships and queer desire and kind of normalizing and making, transforming, a moment, a domestic, mundane moment into a thing of beauty. And you do that so well. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about kind of how you take lived experience of the everyday and transform that into a moment in your paintings.
Yeah, I think, being a painter is such a privilege. I think it's the best job in the world. And on top of being able to just be in the studio and do this thing that I've loved since I've been a kid, I think the most meaningful aspect of it is that it changes the way you live your life. And so if you're laying on a bed looking at someone you love and the knee reminds you of something maybe and reminds you of this painting you saw when you were a student that you found incredible, all of a sudden that person in front of you looks as beautiful or more because of this connection. So I think it's kind of a very active way of trying to live in the world and see how everything's communicating and touches each other. And I think I find subjects that way, like how art history is talking to my lived experience all the time, if I'm open to that. And so it's about, I think, I love this Annie Dillard quote. I talked about it in an interview I had with Joe Smale, who's here tonight, who was a professor of mine at MICA and who also changed my life and helped me understand Matisse as an abstract painter. This is kind of anecdotal, but I think it's pertinent. I was drawing likenesses and things, and she was kind of like, this is sort of lousy, have you heard of abstraction? There's a lot more to learn here. And I think that helped me understand this work and enter it. And anyway, I think that's relevant. But I was talking to her about Annie Dillard, this quote from Annie Dillard, which is beauty and grace happening whether or not we want it to. And the least we can do is be there. And I think that that's a lot like being in this moment and letting art history and formal questions and what you love to do be part of that moment too. So that's a long answer for how I come to painting my domestic spaces, but hopefully that communicates something.
It also shows that you were paying attention to art history, which
Yeah.
some of us love that.
Yeah, I don't know if it was said, but Virginia was my art history professor, so it's my Nepo baby moment.
It was a pleasure.
I'm sure you were an excellent student.
Of course.
Of course he was.
Yeah.
Joe can attest to that, right? Yes.
We had so much fun working on the show together, and there's no one more enthusiastic than Louis to talk about anything I had in my brain after having worked here for 26 years and looking at Matisse and the Coen sisters and the collection for that long. Anything I could come up with, he was just so so enthusiastic and so excited and wanted to know everything and remembers it because he's young and his memory is much better than mine. But one of the great treasures of the Cone collection, of our collection, is we have wonderful archives. And I don't know if you all know the story, but I'll repeat it, of the making of the large reclining nude, AKA the pink nude. Matisse came to Baltimore for one night in 1930. I don't know if you all know that. At that time, in 1930, he was one of the most famous artists in the world. So this was a really big deal.
Right near Micah, right? On Utah Place.
Yes, he was on Utah Place. He came to see Etta Cone, the youngest of the Cone sisters, who had lost her elder sister, Clarabelle, the year before. And Matisse was in the United States working on a big mural project for the Barnes Foundation, and our friend Joe may be in the house. And he came to Baltimore to pay his condolences to Etta for the death of her sister. And for the first time, he saw the collection. He saw what she and Clarabelle had put together. He saw his own works. He saw works by his frenemy, who we heard about before, Picasso. He saw, one of the most beautiful Cezanne paintings ever made that's on view in the Cone wing right now. He saw all of everything that they had gotten put together up to that point. And so he realized, and I'm sure Etta mentioned that this museum had opened on this spot the year before. It had been founded much earlier, but it had opened in the John Russell Pope building in 1929. And so Matisse realized if he played his cards right, he could potentially have a major presence at a museum on the East Coast of the United States. And so during that visit, he saw the beautiful blue nude, which is a real highlight of the collection, which we don't have a picture of because I wasn't sure I was doing that until now. He saw the blue nude, and I think a couple years later decided it was time for him to redo it in his new style. So we worked on it for 6 months, which I think for him was a long time. I think for Louis, that's such a long time for some of his paintings. And he sent these photographs to Etta in 2 different letters. And said something like, "Oh, I'm just working on a little something. I'm working on a nude. Didn't know if you'd be interested," in a way of basically seducing her, wooing her to make sure she bought the painting in the end. And luckily for us, he was successful, and the collection entered the collection. And so we've always had a selection of the photos on the label in the Cone Rotunda, for those of you who have seen it. But it was a great thrill to be able to show them to Louis, the real ones, not just reproductions, which show a lot more sort of three-dimensional work that he did, a lot of cutout work. It's really incredible. And I just wondered, if knowing a little bit about the history, what about Matisse's process intrigued you about this painting in particular?
I think it's the dedication to starting over, to saying this is good but not good enough. And I feel really pushed by Matisse and in this documentation of, I feel like as a mere mortal looking at them, each one of those could have been beautiful paintings, and this extreme dedication to a kind of perfection, even if it's personal, and one that I don't fully understand, I find really inspiring. And so I think spending time and seeing all these different decisions is just, as a painter, I was talking about these kind of nuts and bolts aspect of making painting, is so amazing to get into the mind of an artist like Matisse because of this documentation. And I'm so glad that my painting hanging next to the pink nude is so small because I'm not quite this hardcore yet. But yeah, I feel really moved by that.
Thank you.
So we just wanted to share with you all a moment from the show with this pairing, which juxtaposes a lithograph by Matisse with Louis's studio nude. And really just to think, about the quality of line and sort of the economy of line in a way, and the way in which this focus on the back and the sinuousness of the form is something that you riff on so beautifully, and you can see the little sketches on the right-hand side of Studio Nude. If we go to the next slide, there we go, you can see some of the actual sketches that Louis has made of forms like this one. And I think, for us in talking with you through these works, we were really commenting a little bit on how you do with the male body what Matisse did somewhat with the female body, and you make it your own. Can you talk a little bit about sort of that aha moment that you had of realizing that you could do that, and then how does it work for you?
Yeah, I think for me it's something that's so natural because it's who I am as a person, and my love for Matisse overlaid onto my lived experience feels really organic. But then when it leaves the studio, it enters into this history that doesn't necessarily have that kind of representation of homosexual desire or queer bodies, and that's I don't know, it's a curious thing. It's something that I feel really grateful to be able to do that now in a way. I don't think I would have the career I know I wouldn't have the career I have today 20, 30 years ago. But it's also not something I feel that in control of. I think it's just very lucky that I've arrived now, and I'm interested in Matisse alongside a lot of other art history too, and I think a lot about how queer artists from the past who were making formal inventions like Matisse maybe didn't get the recognition that they did, and I think about my practice as a way of both trying to contribute to art history, but also maybe shape the way that we look backwards too. So I'm trying to think of who some of those artists would be, like Christopher Wood, who was a queer British painter. I reference his work at the Biennale, and I think it's a moment that we're not far enough away from it to be, different people really, that we're still in this moment and we're still forming it. So, yeah.
I love that. Thank you.
I think we want to look.
Let's see. I think we have some. We wanted to share some of the varying states of Studio Nude because I don't know about you guys. I always find it so much fun to get insight into an artist's process and how do they think and how do they change. So you can see through a few snapshots this painting evolve, as Katy referenced. For Matisse, maybe 6 months was a long time. This was a work, Louis, that you started before, I think, or maybe, while we were in very early stages, but largely before, as a concept, this show came together. And seeing that sort of evolution over time is really cool and really fun. When did you realize kind of what you wanted to do with this painting? When did you realize where you wanted to take it?
I think a nice thing about being able to pair the state photographs to the Matisse ones, it hasn't gone through such radical transformations, but I'm happy that we showed the drawings where, like Matisse, I'm drawing from life a lot, but I feel that a painting has different demands. It's kind of its own world, and sometimes you have to bend the rules to make them make sense in a way. And so you see me add the profile of the figure sort of late in the game because I'm kind of realizing that shape isn't working, even though in the drawings that thing's not there. And I think the subject is also something that Matisse paints a lot, like the studio nude, or I love this just talking to iconic subjects in art history, like the still life, the landscape, the studio model, and I wanted to think about an updated way of playing with that genre. But yeah.
Yeah, I think we were also talking a little bit about the process, and that it's called Studio Nude for a reason, because you see the studio, and with the vine charcoal and the sketches off to the right-hand side in the top corner, there are these little cups that are holding, I don't know, solvent or ink, and the brushes. There's this sense that we are getting, that you're giving us deliberately insight into your process with this painting, that we take on your gaze in a way, standing over this figure, looking down, seeing this scene. And that's also something I think that, Matisse, as you mentioned, and earlier when we were talking, you mentioned that he paints himself sometimes painting a painting.
Right. Yeah, I think art is about asking a viewer to slow down and try to enter your world or take a moment to see things from your point of view. And there are formal ways of doing that, like literally bringing the viewer close to the subject or positioning them directly above it. And it's something I think Matisse does so well, too, with the way that the figures fill the frames, or maybe just the corner of him is visible in a drawing. So it's something I've learned from spending time with his work, for sure.
Excellent. Now we're going to move on a bit to your interest in Matisse's odalisques and in reshaping them in the way that you want, and also your interest in his paintings made in Nice. As many of you may or may not know, Matisse moved to or traveled to Nice, France for the first time at the end of 1917. And ended up spending the most of the rest of his life in Nice or in Vence, which was nearby. He fell in love with the light and color and atmosphere of the south of France. He was from an area in France in the very northern part of the country where everything was dark and grim. So I'm sure living in the south of France was not a problem for him. It also was a place where there were a lot of models. There was a film industry in Nice. So he often could find people that would be willing to model for him. However, even when he was making the paintings, particularly in the late 20s, throughout the 20s, he started to get a lot of negative criticism because the pictures were considered too pretty and too decorative, and they lost that kind of sort of toughness that he had during his Fauve period or during World War I. And so when you came to us and were particularly interested in his Nice paintings, I was thrilled because I think they are understudied and underappreciated. And I love the idea that they appeal to you so much. So could you talk a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if we think about Matisse's career and its relationship to our understanding of art history in general, there's a parallel where people wanted Matisse to be like this train that was like going towards the cutouts, and that those were like the perfect version of him. But when you're a painter and when you look at our history, it's like it's not traveling towards somewhere particular. It's a very complex, layered history to be both a person and to be an art history. And I understand the Nice period as critical to the development of all the abstraction that comes afterward. And I think it's his focus on this clarity of light and the potential for color to conjure light. And so I see the work not like a detour or a return to order, which is sometimes how it's talked about, but as a really fundamental part of his process. And that's so meaningful for me as someone who loves to paint people, who loves to use this ancient material basically and feel like this does matter today because we're not marching towards some objective finish line, that things are constantly moving back on themselves. And so that's kind of the big picture reason why I like that work so much. But I think I also just really respond to its kind of joie de vivre. Like he, sort of got criticized for saying he wanted art to be like a comfortable armchair. And
Very
it's
much, yeah.
sort of, he had to dig himself out of that hole a little bit. But I think it's a totally valid place to make art. Like there's not one way to make a picture or to be an artist. And I think it's nice to hear that such a serious artist had that kind of goal. So yeah, I think that those two things are part of what makes me feel so connected to the period. And so many of my interests are just so present there, like the patterns of textiles or the interior space. The way that we choose objects also shows us as people. I feel like in portraiture, it's like these paintings don't have Matisse physically in them, but he's shopping for all these fabrics, he's buying these clothes. They're as much portraits of him as they are of the women. And I think that's something that I kind of took license from too, painting myself or the male figure, where it's almost like I'm also the odalisque, or I'm seeing myself that way, in a way that I think in that period people couldn't have understood that. The male painter, the female nude. There's this very dated dynamic that I think doesn't really apply to us anymore, and I feel like he's useful for me as a painter in a new way somehow.
And did the odalisque sort of free you up to do more male nudes in a way that you felt more comfortable?
Yeah, I think that the kind of iconic role of the reclining female nude in art history definitely made a lot of space for making at least one male, you know? Like, I feel like, you know, there's a pretty big deficit, so I've got a couple left before people are like...
It's also interesting, I mean, I think, you know, for Matisse, you know, we've learned how important his models were. And he drew all the time, and he did do drawings for compositions. But he really would sort of, I think for him, to get the real spark of creativity, he needed a person in the room with him. And we see that in many of many of his paintings. You know, we know, for example, who the models might be. They're not named, they're not portraits per se, because they're sort of representing something else, but they are people that were really important to his process. Without them, if he was alone, it would really just be, you know, he'd probably just paint a still life, because he really needed that human spark. Talk a little bit about how you use models or don't, how you use drawings, and how your process is similar or different.
Yeah, I paint a lot from memory. I'm kind of interested in the way that memory is also a subject, or the observation of memory has results, like the way things get warped or forgotten. Like those are forms of realism, because it's just true about how we remember something. So if I had to pick a subject, a kind of dominant subject in my work, it probably wouldn't be really the figure, but it would be memory. And I think that's maybe a difference between my work and Matisse's work. But I love that you said he needed someone in the room, and for me, maybe it's like I need Matisse in the room. And like he's there in a way.
Sorry, I just think that's fantastic.
I may pass out. This is just the most fun I've ever had. Sorry. I'm sorry. There's been a lot of like goosebumps and a little bit of weeping over this project, which I'm happy to tell you all at another time. You know, knowing, should I say it? I mean, I think, you know, I've been here at the museum for a long time, and I arrived here just as the current cone collection was renovated. The last time was in 2001, and working with Louis and knowing that he saw the installations that I did and made the connections that I made has been very, very touching for me. As curators, we don't often hear about how our permanent collection installations inspire people. You know, it's not as much fun as the shows, and we love hearing it that you like our shows, don't get me wrong. But hearing Louis talk about the cone collection or works upstairs, or we're on the same floor, works on this floor, has just meant the world to me, to know that I had a tiny little bit of effect on your choices and the kind of art that you do. But that's all about me, sorry. Okay, I'm just gonna move on to the next one.
Go for it.
Okay. What do we got? Oh, yes. Oh, this is me again. Okay. So this was another little tidbit that was dropped when we were installing the show. When
You're making us look bad as art historians, Katy.
yes, well, you know, the beautiful Richardson Street living room, which when I think we opened, we all gasped and sort of fell onto the carpet. When we were talking with Louis about it when he came to visit, he said, well, you know, of course, you know, it started with the piano lesson from MoMA. And I said, what? And I said, well, what are you talking about? And he was like, well, that's kind of, you know, it was really inspirational to me. And I was like, damn, I would have put that on the label. So can you talk a little bit about the inspiration that you got for this painting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to be honest, I feel like I'm giving too much away about the painting sometimes. But mostly because I so didn't accomplish what I had set out to do. You know, I feel so mystified by this work that's at MoMA, and it's such a strange painting. All this huge expanse of gray and this odd shadow on the boy, and you can't really tell where he is in the room, and what's outside and what's inside and what's material and what's just paint. And often I kind of arrive at dimensions by just copying them from wall label, so they are the same size. And so I said something earlier when we were talking about this, and I feel like being an artist is sometimes having this goal, this, you know, you imagine the painting, and you're like, the next one's gonna be my best one. Like, I'm gonna be able to do it, and then you totally fail, and it's like so not the piano lesson at all. But the way that you fail is really who you are as an artist, and that's something that I think I learned from also with Matisse, and I've got to make peace with that. So I don't think that this is the piano lesson, but it did come from the piano lesson in a way. And I think there are a lot of like Matissean things happening in it, like the ceramics or the rugs that are things that I live with, that I'm really excited that they kind of continue to pop up in the universe of the paintings, like Matisse's sculpture here, or the figure above, which is actually a painting he made, not another figure. But in the painted world, things take on strange properties, and is she there? Or like, is that rug an actual animal? Or like an ecstatic way of looking at the world that I get really excited by.
And do you play the piano?
I play really poorly. But but there's a little nod to the piano lesson too there, where there's music and Satie's written there, and I'm still trying to clunk my way through it on that keyboard at home. But
This is, so we don't have the piano lesson from MoMA, but this is the wonderful pair that we do have in the show. And I think that when we, again, hung these side by side, it was the process of working on this show where we were looking at these things and talking about these things, and then you actually get them in the room together and you learn even more. And in looking at both of these paintings side by side, there is a sense of a progression through space, and each space culminates with a window. And there's a sort of, you know, seduction on the part of the artist where you wend your way into the depth of this space. And the play of light and pattern and color, just spectacular. A little bit, one of the comments that Katy made when we were looking at Interior with Parakeets is that it's not really about what it's about. It's titled Interior with Parakeets, but I defy almost anyone to quickly look at this painting and find the parakeets. It takes you a minute. Similarly, I think, Louis, in your painting, what it's about, you know, what is it about? I mean, what is the, right, where are the parakeets? So for you, in your painting, where are the parakeets?
yeah,
What would
parakeets
you say
are
it's
on the
about?
floor.
Yeah, okay.
And that literally, I think such a joy of having these works live together is realizing how much I feel like I've let Matisse into my DNA as a painter, and I think that the relationships just felt like they were kind of expanding in the room. It was like, oh my God, it's a lot of Matisse, like, but I'm so excited by that. Like, I love in this work how the light, the reflection from the exterior window shifts over the tile, and it's such a sensitive gesture made by Matisse of this kind of chalky red into the darker, more kind of Venetian red there. And I love this, I love looking at this kind of thing in painting. It's, you know, that's a flat surface that he's played with perspective, but it both is flat and not realistic, but the light is falling on it in a realistic way. And these kind of two things happening at once are really exciting for me. And so in this work, I was thinking about the same kind of phenomenon of light, like the light from the window that creates this stripe of pure white, and then the shadow colors, and how that at a formal level, at an abstract level, is exciting to play with. And so the painting, you know, is kind of about nothing. It's about being in that space, but maybe the way into that painting is about the light on the floor, the way that here, for me, it's about that tile. You know, there's all this information and crazy arabesque and pattern, but then there's also this very sensitive observation of light, which, like I was saying earlier, comes back into your life. It's like then seeing that is meaningful somehow.
It's like the observation, you're capturing this fleeting moment of beauty, and really that's, you know, what it's about, maybe. Yeah.
one of the real pleasures of this show was looking at things in our collection, Matisse paintings from the Cone collection with Louis that, with his point of view. The painting on the left, Anemones in Chinese Vase, one of my favorite paintings. We stood there looking at it together. And, when I think about this picture, I think about the vase, I think about the flowers, I think about the fact that we have this, we have a painting on the wall behind, a kind of half odalisque that we're getting for free. This picture has it all packed in, and I can tell so many stories with it. And as we were walking through the Cone galleries, Lou was like, well, what about that blue fabric on the bed? And I was like, what? And the things he's looking for are so different from what I look at. And the edges are so important to him. So why don't you talk a little bit about edges in Matisse and in your own work?
Yeah, Matisse, I think he's also an artist that's so invested in art history. There's the incredible Vent show on view right now where you see him drawing through Rubens and Mantegna. And while that's so clear in his work, it's also clear that Matisse is someone who's making images at the advent of photography, or the relative new life of photography, and how these snapshot views of the world change the way we think about composition. And I think that's why modern painting, the edges are so alive. The compositions bleed into our lives, and I think that has a lot to do with painting's confrontation with photography. And I think that's an ongoing problem that we're still living through. It's like this avalanche of images that we all see all day through photo, and how, even though I'm so invested in art history, I'm very much someone who grew up looking at digital imagery, looking at screens. And I think that was a strange thing about this show too. I think I sometimes feel unsure about what makes the work contemporary, but then seeing them side by side, it became so clear. But the edges thing, it's like the surface, the kind of radical changes in perspective, these are all things that happened so relatively recently in the history of painting. And you can see it in my version too, where what maybe historically would have been the primary subject of the work, the human figure, which when there were maybe more hierarchy in terms of subject matter, gets sidelined, and maybe the feeling becomes completely different and more realistic for us as people because of our relationship to the photo.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. Okay.
Oh, all right. I just have to tell you all that the Large Roses was one of the first paintings, I think it was the first painting, that we unpacked as we were installing the exhibition. And I can't tell you how many people came to a complete standstill in front of this painting and started crying. I mean, honestly, we all were just like, oh my God, it's the most beautiful thing ever. It was insane. I've had colleagues, thank us for putting this painting up because they get to walk by it every day on their way to their office. It's spectacularly beautiful. And I just want to share, we didn't talk about this before, but in a conversation that you and I had several years ago now, you said that it's, for a contemporary artist working today, it's brave to make a painting about joy. And I love that observation. And I completely agree. I think it is brave to make a painting about joy. And for me, this painting is very much about joy. You're reveling in the paint, you're reveling in the color and the life of this painting. One of the joys that we had in pairing it with the Matisse Still Life Bouquet of Dahlias was the play between the scale. If you look in each painting, there's a table, there's a chair, there's a vase of flowers. But could they be any different in terms of their relationship to each other? Can you talk a little bit about how you think about scale and what this play does for you?
I think this is a good example of maybe the subtle ways my work is so contemporary when compared with an artist like Matisse. And scale, I think, is one of those things that I noticed. I mentioned, thankfully, Tom is so much smaller than the Pink Nude, but by and large, my work is larger than the Matisse paintings in the show. And I think that probably, relates to how much large imagery we're so accustomed to seeing. And that was kind of nice to feel like I am very much making work in my moment that is in subtle and strange ways influenced by the kinds of things I see. But I think another thing that was reinforced by seeing these paintings together was this kind of repetition of the drawn motif that is something Matisse does so well, like the painting and within the painting, or the drawing, you know, in the Red Studio, that incredible painting. There's all this work that he did inside, and there's this strange transformation of and deepening of his world that you notice in the wallpaper and the kind of gestural text. You know, I think painting, to sum this sort of complex idea up that I'm probably butchering, but it's really asking a lot of the viewer. I think there's like a right way to look at painting, and it's by sort of letting it do some magic to you. You know, it's like if there's drawn flowers and then there's the real flowers, all of a sudden you're kind of instructed to enter the space in a different way that asks you to suspend your belief a little bit. And I think that that's kind of important, you know, to cue in paintings. It's like, I think about the drawings of the flowers as that kind of invitation. It's like, there are several realities happening here, and come with me inside of them, you know.
Your drawing, I mean, I think with those drawings of the flowers that are underneath the vase of flowers, you're drawing our attention to the artifice of the painting, and you're, you know, really taking us along on this ride of belief and faith in a way.
Right, which is something Matisse did so well, where, you know, like he needs the model, he needs the room, but then the paintings can become wild, you know, like totally not related to our more conventional ideas of reality. So it's something that I really love about Matisse.
Nothing to add. Drop the mic. Oh my God.
And I think the scale in that painting, I think it's so satisfying because it's just so big and juicy, and you just want to throw your body against the
It's
canvas.
immersive, yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. It may be the least sexy, but it's plenty sexy.
It's true.
Oh my God.
Right. Aw, right. I know. I mean, I think, again, you know, we took this photo somewhat in jest, and it was great to have it be used as the marketing image for tonight's event, because it says so much about all of this, and how much fun we had working on this show. And I have to say that, you know, I'm as a curator and as an art historian, my focus has really been on American painting, from, you know, as I say, 4 centuries of American painting up to the present moment. Yes. And so I've had the distinct pleasure of running around the museum with Katy Rothkopf and Louis Fratino talking about Matisse for the last, you know, on and off over the last year or two, which has been just a hoot and a half. And I had to think of this photo a little bit, and I wanted to ask you both the endless talk show question, which is, if you were going to have dinner with Matisse, what would you want to ask him? And Katy, maybe I'll start with you.
Oh, here I am. Well, I had a different answer earlier today, but looking at this photo, I think I would need to ask him about what he really thought about the Coen sisters. You know, we have Edda's portrait over his left shoulder, her beautiful interior with dog over his right. And I just, you know, I have my own fantasy about how, I mean, I want to know what he really thought about her, and how he felt about having his collection here, and a little bit more about the wooing to have her buy the pink nude. I would just love to hear a little bit more from him about that.
I love that. Thank you. Louis, how about you?
You know, I think having a reference is very much like having a relationship, even if it's only living in your head. And you know, when you're painting and you have these masters in mind, you're kind of trying to win them over with your work. And there's a great story about Bonnard that like so many paintings at the time, people were publishing terrible reviews, like, Bernard, what a hack, like, is he even a good painter? And there's this incredible drawing that Matisse made where the headline in the newspaper says, is Bernard a good painter? And he writes in this huge, beautiful arabesque-like script, oui. And I think if I could write, is Louis Fratino a good painter? I would want to know if you'd write oui or no.
I think we would all agree that it would be a resounding oui. Évidemment. Thank you. I think
one more.
Oh, there we go. Yes, that's right.
We couldn't help but
We
show
couldn't
you the
help.
back of one of Lewis's paintings, which, don't tell anybody. We just thought it was just a marvelous little signature, and if you were lucky enough to own one, to have that greeting you as you were hanging it from place to place, it would make me so happy. With Ann Schaefer, our wonderful paintings conservator, who we did not ask permission to show her photos.
Please
Ann,
don't
if
tell
you're
her that
really
we did
sorry.
this. Okay.
And I think that is it. Is there anything that you feel like we haven't covered that you'd like to yap about? Or we can turn it over to questions, a few questions from the audience.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't want anything left unsaid.
Yeah.
But yeah, if anybody has any questions, we can take a couple questions, or you guys can go out and enjoy your evenings. How do we do this? Is anyone going to help us? Okay, good.
Hi, I'll circulate a mic, and then please speak into the mic, and we'll take as many as we can.
Hello. Firstly, it's so awesome to just be here and hear from you. As also a Baltimore native, my question is, how did your time living in Maryland, I know you grew up right outside of the city, how did that shape your experience as an artist? Was there anything specific? I know you talked about Micah. Is there anything specific in the city that you can point to that really shaped who you are?
Absolutely. I feel so grateful that I went to Micah. I remember when my dad took me to visit as a junior, or maybe when do you start having to think about that? Yeah.
These days it's kindergarten.
You're right. I was like, I am not going to college an hour away from where I grew up. Like, I need to I want to see something new. And so I was kind of not super jazzed about the idea of it. And through some divine intervention, it worked out that I did end up going to Micah. And I feel like it's been, just so crucial for my development as a painter to be at that school because of the incredible artists who are my teachers, some of whom, I still get to be in dialogue with today, and also because of Baltimore specifically. I think, meeting people in New York, where I live now, who are my age, who've been like, I've lived here for 15 years. It's like, how old are you? But it's because they went to school in New York, and I feel like Baltimore provides this really unique, very special environment to be a student. I remember not worrying about, too much about the economy of art, which is something that you do have to think about at one point, but I think the focus at Micah, because of the kind of city that Baltimore is, was really about making do with what you have, and not professionalizing yourself right away. I feel like the pressures in New York are so different. Like, I think you can get burned out very quickly, expect too much too soon. When you're a student, that's something, to think about maybe afterward. And so I feel like that was really a gift from the city, to be able to make things really for the joy of making, and not to put that expectation on them.
Hello. Oh, hi. Hi, Louis. Nice to see you. It's nice to see a fellow Southern High alumni up on stage, make it out of the art class. That's my plug to fund your local public art school and their art program, because it's a life-changing place to be for a young person. I'm curious about your thoughts on AI art and like what it means for like the creative process, how it changes like people's idea of what art can be, and like who gets to like claim to be an artist. Yeah, I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, let's see. I don't like it. Yeah. I guess. Yeah, there's a lot to dig into there, I guess. And if I am proven to be a Luddite by ignoring it to a degree, I guess that's how it is. But I don't know. I feel like there's the reason to wake up every day is to kind of rub up against issues and problems, especially in the studio, and to have someone do it for you takes, it removes the whole point, or have something do it for you. It's weird to me, this idea of like generated stuff that isn't generated. It's just kind of like the lowest common denominator version of all the things that are like called. So I find it deeply uninteresting and not useful. Yeah.
I think that your work is so personal also, and drawn from memory, right? And we who are looking at your work and loving your work are counting on that it's coming from your heart and your brain and your soul.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that an artist that finds it interesting, that there are billions of ways of making art. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but the way that I can't imagine wanting to give my job, which is such a privilege and a gift, away. I want to be the one to do it. So we're gonna check in with you in about 10 years. Right, just churning them out. Yeah.
I'm going to come to the other side and take a question.
Hi, my name is Oriolua, and I'm also a MICA alum, and it's so amazing to be in this room with other MICA people. And in your sketchbooks, I saw that there was an image of a Kodak point-and-shoot camera, and you spoke a little bit about photography and painting, and the introduction there in Matisse's creations. And so I wanted to ask you, what is your relationship to photography? How do you work with the still image and your referencing of work? And a side question is, what was some of the music you were listening to while making this work?
Well, the photo, I feel like I'm a pretty omnivorous consumer of art history, and I feel like great photography, great film has as much to offer me as a painter as great painting does. And I also think there's a particular relationship to queer imagery in photography. This thing that could be done in a private studio, or could be mailed without having to be shipped. I think that there's a lineage there of representing queer desire that is attached to photography. And so I think I've arrived at a lot of reference in art history as I've dug into queer history that is mostly photo, honestly, especially when I was starting out. And let's see. I think that something that's important for me, though, is that because there's such a diversity of references, that everything kind of travels through the filter of drawing. And so when there's photography I love or photographic work I'm interested in, I usually draw from it a lot. And I kind of think about it like a game of telephone, where at the end of all this translation and drawing, it becomes something different and then lives in the painted world in a very integrated way. So yeah, it's not the kind of antagonism towards photography, but I think in the painted work, I want the references to be mixed and complicated and buried. But yeah, I really love photography and look at a lot of it and I mean, I don't think about it as a photographic practice, but I work from my own photography too. And let's see, the music, in this show, this is like 10 years of work. So I've gone through, I don't know, a lot of different moments. It's hard to say. Some less cringy than others, but yeah.
Do you listen to music in the studio?
Sometimes, not always. I feel like when I get really focused, I sometimes realize I forget that it's on, or I'm like, oh, it's playing this album over and over again, so it could be either on or off. And yeah, so typically not really.
Time for 2 more questions.
Hi, Louis. My name is Max. I'm so inspired by your work, so thank you for speaking to us today. As an artist, my genre is poetry, and I'm struck sometimes by this tension between craft as a tangible thing and also inspiration as this sort of mystic thing that can be miraculous. And I'm curious about what the ratio feels like to you between method and perhaps this sort of miraculous thing that is impossible to describe or capture when you create something beautiful.
I mean, I think we touched on it earlier about this kind of marriage between material and subject, and how in Matisse's work, something I love about it so much is that they're always both. And I sometimes make painting because of poetry I read, and I think it's nice that you gesture towards the kind of immaterial quality of it, which is so different than painting, but the result is so similar. But I think the only way for me to sort of make space for that thing you're talking about, like the miraculous or the hard to understand, is really through like play, and something that Joe, who's here tonight, really taught me, that play is serious, and it's not a joke, it's no joke actually. And I think the play with material and kind of humbling yourself before material, whether it's words or it's paint, is the thing that lets the light in a little bit.
Hello. My name's Eric. I had 2 questions that I wanted to ask you. They're sort of interrelated. The first is, in the conversation about Matisse, it's almost as if there's a very clean sort of sense of locking into Matisse without a suggestion that I'm sure there are other models or other artists along the way that you said, not this, not that, I'm not this person, I'm not. So what was that journey like? Was it an immediate sort of fixation or lock into Matisse? And the other piece was, in all this conversation about queer desire, trying to determine whether or not knowing that you're working from memory is less or more satisfying, knowing that there's not a person in the room changes the notion of like queer desire, because you are not actively desiring someone who's in the room. So is that reveal important to you? Would you rather withhold that reveal? Because traditional sort of queer spectatorship seems to suggest that you as the artist or the painter objectifying a subject who's sitting there creates a certain sexual tension. And now I feel like it's a different type of tension, knowing that you're working from memory, or maybe you don't always work from memory.
Let's see. I guess I feel like, I'm not sure if I 100% understood, but maybe it reminds me of when people are like, does it feel really vulnerable to show the work? Like because it's you or because it's your partner? And I guess I always feel like it's a painting, and there is a kind of distance where the painting has its own life, its own demands as an object, really. Like I'm interested in the objecthood of painting as much as I'm interested in abstraction, and I think that makes it really have an independent life. And so the images of sex or desire, I don't feel exposed by, but I'm not 100% sure if I'm answering your question.
And the other piece about locking into Matisse,
Oh, right. Yeah, I think that it's a good question because I think, Picasso and Matisse are such huge figures that to me, I guess it made sense. If I was serious about painting, I should try to talk to serious people. But the more I work and the more mature I get, I think I realize that, what they were doing was happening all over the world. Like, it was such a privilege to be in the Biennale that I was in because it really focused on these kind of modernisms that we know maybe not so much about in America, like in South America or in India or even in Britain, like somewhere as close as the UK, like strange things that are really actually very fertile references that have a lot to do with Matisse and Picasso, but offer alternate routes into image making. So, of course, there's Picasso and Matisse, but when I dig into painters, like I mentioned Christopher Wood, or also in the Biennale was Bhupen Kakkar, this Indian painter. These are paintings that are maybe more possible because of what happened in Paris, because of Matisse, but they do something independent, and so it's like it's a more expanded story, I think, and one that I hope my work will be able to tell.
And I would say that you are very much, in dialogue with many artists. We were clearly very selective in zeroing in on Matisse for this wonderful exhibition. But I think that, both Katy and I would say whenever we're talking to you, you're always out there looking at art, We have lots of conversations about a whole range of artists. And I think that the way that you draw inspiration and careful consideration from, anything you might have seen yesterday, a recent trip to Brazil, for example, continues to inform your work. So we're all excited to see how that, shapes and evolves over the course of time.
Louis, Katy, Virginia, thank you so much for this deep dive into your work together. And please, everyone, see Louis's show.